Okay, thank you everyone for being here. As you said, my name is Pellis Yuli. I'm a principal scientist at Adobe. But for this particular talk, what's probably more relevant is I'm the co-chair of the Threats and Harms Working Group for the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. If you don't know what that group is, you're in the right talk because that's what I'm going to be covering today. Basically, I'm just going to walk through the who, what, when, where, and why of what people are doing to combat deepfakes, or at least one sector is doing. So I'm going to start with the very high level, and we'll go down to the point where I show you hex editors. So why are we doing this, right? Well, one of the reasons is you know that election year in the United States, and deepfakes are already starting to propagate around. In February, one was being propagated using President Biden's voice. They were able to identify that person, and he's going to be fined $6 million, as well as having 26 criminal charges levied against him. But these are still going around on social media. So, you know, just last month, there was one around Kamala Harris that was being spread around. But if you attended the keynote from the first day, you know that this is not just a US issue. In 2024, 64 different countries are heading to the polls, or some of them have already headed to the polls, which is about 49% of the world's population. And so we're seeing these things pop up in other countries as well, such as Slovakia and Moldova. They also show up in countries like India, where people are also being arrested there for trying to use deepfakes to interfere with elections. And a lot of people think deepfakes are immediately bad, but it's actually some interesting things going on. So in India, it's a very large country of 1 billion people. They speak a lot of different languages. And if you are a national level politician, you're not going to speak every local language within the country. So some politicians in India have actually commissioned deepfakes of themselves speaking in a local language. So for instance, if they wanted to reach out to the Punjabi region of India and they didn't speak Punjabi, they would commission a deepfake of themselves delivering their political message in Punjabi in order to be able to reach that portion of the electorate. On the other hand, in the United States, you know, we're seeing a lot of pushback on it, where bills are being introduced to protect people's voices from being used. And it creates a sort of split perspective, especially if you have politicians who are intentionally using them. How do you communicate to the public, okay, this deepfake of me is a good one, this is one I intentionally created of myself, but this other deepfake of me is a bad one, and you shouldn't believe that one. It creates an interesting challenge for the public. And when you have this type of interference in elections, it has meta-level impacts as well. So for instance, Moody's reported that deepfake political content undermines the credibility of US institutions. And right now, we are not in a great place in terms of combating them. The FCC is looking for ways to do it, but they don't have anything specific yet. And Meta and Google are doing the best they can, but it's inconsistent because there's no great way of doing this and identifying deepfakes. That said, technological companies are trying to come together to do whatever they can. So earlier this year, a tech accord of all these different companies came together to create a tech accord to combat deceptive use of AI in the 2024 elections. But this problem permeates beyond just elections. So the British Medical Journal published a paper last month, and in that paper they were talking about the use of deepfakes in the medical field, where people are using these to promote scam medical cures and those types of medical sales. And one of those was around a doctor named Michael Mosley. If you don't know who Michael Mosley is, basically all you need to know is that many people consider him to be a trusted physician. And the other thing you need to know is that he's already passed away. But people are still generating deepfakes of him trying to promote scam cures online. And it's reaching the point where the British Medical Journal is publishing papers on it. They're also useful in creating mass confusion. So in May 2023, an AI hallucination of the Pentagon being attacked caused a lot of confusion and caused a temporary dip in the stock market until it was proven to be fake. And we've seen them in conflict areas. So in the Ukraine, we've seen them on both sides, where a deepfake of Zelensky was created saying that Ukraine was surrendering, and a deepfake of Putin was created saying that he was implementing martial law. And not only that, but the way that we find news and we go out and learn about things is changing. So a Pew Research study found that US adults under 30 now trust information from social media as much as they do from a national news outlet. And you might think to yourself, like, if you're older, you might think, oh, kids these days. But there is a reason for that. So, just last month, President Biden dropped out of the presidential race here in the US. And immediately people started sending me links from Instagram and X of his announcement. Me being older and being skeptical, I thought, well, maybe his account just got hacked. I'm going to go to his website and use that as an authoritative source to figure out whether this is true or not. But because he did it on the weekend, the website wasn't updated. So my view of, well, I'll just go to the authoritative source was flawed because in this instance, Instagram and X were the authoritative sources. And this is having an impact on how we function as a society. So 52% of Americans have changed the way they use social media. And 43% have lessened their overall news intake because you get frustrated. There's all this fake news going around. There's disinformation out there. So you unplug. You just check out from it. Deepfakes are showing up in financial scams. So there was a 300% increase in deepfake-based fraud attempts in 2020. And over 60% of Americans say that they have come across altered images and videos that are intended to mislead. So it's becoming this reoccurring issue. And not only does it affect our confidence in government institutions, but it also affects our confidence in each other. We all go on Facebook or Instagram and we see our friends retweeting or reposting things and, that are potentially not true. And then we start not trusting each other as news sources because of this. And not only does it impact our confidence in each other, it does actually bring us together on one particular issue. And that is that 77% of both Republicans and Democrats believe that there needs to be restrictions around this to cut this down. It's making everybody frustrated. So everyone's coming together to say something needs to be done. But when it comes to who's actually responsible for this, I found it kind of interesting that 53% of Americans believe it's the journalist's job to address this. 12% say it's the government's job, and only 9% say it's tech companies' responsibility to go out and control this, which I found kind of interesting. And some people may question, so how big of a problem is this, right? Spying a deepfake video is not that hard, or spying a deepfake image isn't that hard. You go and you count the number of fingers, and then you can figure out that it's a deepfake. So in 2022, over 50% of people felt that they would be able to reliably spot them. Another study by Henry Farid that's going on right now at UC Berkeley not only looks at videos, but also looks at audio content. This data right now is preliminary. This is going to be a part of an ongoing research study. But in his preliminary analysis, he found that over 60% of people were able to identify deepfake audio. And they would look for things such as speaking errors, or too much enunciation, or whether people are taking breath between words. And these techniques work, but you have to keep in mind that these are also fairly easy things to fix. For instance, if you've ever mixed music before and you used a drum track, a computerized generated drum track sounds fake because the drumming's too specific. It's too on the beat. And so in a digital audio workstation, there's a dial where you introduce error in order to make it sound more realistic. You could easily do the same thing in post-production of a deepfake, where you insert pauses. So how good are deepfakes today? Right? So can you still count the number of fingers? Do you think that you would be able to tell? And it doesn't really matter how good deepfakes are today, because they're going to be better tomorrow. Technology in this space is rapidly evolving, and if we're going to tackle this, we can't just rely on how good they are today. We have to be thinking about how well they're going to be going forward. So when it comes to who is trying to combat this, there's one group I'm going to talk about today, and that's the group that I'm a part of, which is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. This is not all of the icons of people who are involved in it. It's close to 100 companies. But this isn't necessarily the best way to look at it either way. A better view of this is the types of companies that are coming together to become involved in this. So you've got big tech, such as Microsoft, Google, Adobe. You have chipset manufacturers, Intel, ARM, and Qualcomm. Camera manufacturers are coming together. So you've got Leica and Nikon and Canon and Fujifilm. You have news and media organizations from across the globe. So you've got BBC, CBC, France TV, Universal. You have certificate authorities and identity providers and identity organizations coming together. So you've got your CAs like DigiCert. You have AI groups like OpenAI and 11 Labs. And you have nonprofits like Witness, Partnership on AI, and the Society Library. So I mentioned I am the co-chair on the Threats and Harms Working Group. I'm the scary person, so I work on the threats. The person who works on harms is Jacobo Castellanos, who is a member of Witness. And Witness helps people use video and technology to protect and defend human rights. So you have a bunch of different groups coming together from across the spectrum to try to solve this problem. And it's being done in an open way. So we were founded in 2021, and we are a Linux Foundation Joint Development Foundation project. So we are a 501c6 nonprofit. And our mission is to try to help people identify the provenance, which is basically the history of an image, and the authenticity. Where did this image come from? We're currently on version 2.x of the spec, so we're about 200 pages in, and it is still growing. And we're covering multiple media files, so images, videos, audio files, PDFs. And as part of this open work, we are working with other open source groups like the International Standards Organization, IPTC, ETSI, et cetera. And we don't just create the specification. So the specification we create is called content credentials. This is what actually gets embedded into these media content. But we also create a bunch of supplemental information to help people. So guidance for implementers, user experience guidance. I'm working on the security considerations document. Jacobo, who's my co-chair, is working on harms modeling, et cetera. So we're putting together a lot of information on this. And you may have actually seen some of this starting to make it into things that you use. So Leica has produced, was the first one to produce a camera that has this capability. Nikon and Canon are also working on it. Canon's working with Thomson Reuters in terms of deploying the 1.0 version of these specs. So we can get this information, we can get this out there, we get it deployed, and start getting feedback from the community. I mentioned that chipset manufacturers were involved. And that's because some of this work we are doing actually in this chipsets, in the TPM. So the Qualcomm Snapdragon chipset is collecting information and doing digital signing within its image signal processor. It's actually, if you have a Samsung phone, a recent Samsung phone, it would have a chipset that's capable of doing this and trying to track images from the point that it gets taken within the camera. In addition, a bunch of online services are coming together. So TikTok, DALL-E 3 by OpenAI, Adobe Services, the BBC. We're starting to put this stuff out there. So we need to get feedback. We need to see this in the real world and learn from it. And there's a bunch of groups that are supporting this. So the C2PA is the group that creates the specification. They're writing the document with all the shalls and musts and should that go along with creating a specification. The Content Authenticity Initiative is a group that's actually translating that specification into code. So they're making the open source SDKs available in Rust and Python and JavaScript so that people can start implementing this technology. So if you go onto GitHub, you can see these open source SDKs being generated. And then people are building off of these open source implementations. So for instance, Digimarc created a Chrome extension based on the Content Authenticity Initiative's JavaScript SDK. So that people can start playing with this and start testing in the field. And then there's Project Origin, which is being led by Microsoft and several other organizations. And this is solving the last mile problem. So C2PA creates a spec, the Content Authenticity Initiative creates a tool, but how people use that tool and deploy that tool is important. So how do you solve the last mile problem? How do you get it so that journalists can effectively use this technology in the field and use it correctly and make sure that the implementation is good? So Project Origin's working on what I refer to as sort of the last mile problems. In addition, there have been other open source groups that have spun off of this. So one thing that you want to be able to do with images, you may want to know the person behind who created that image or the organization behind that image. Identity is a really complicated problem. You're probably all familiar with the challenges that came around with the blue check mark on Twitter/X. So there's another group that I'm also a part of, which is the Creator Assertion Working Group. And we're working on ways to have people be able to establish their identity and put their identity into a content credential. And we're working with other standards organizations. So the JPEG committee is working on a standard called JPEG Trust. It will probably be out soon. And it is compatible with C2PA, and it's going to be a superset of things that C2PA provides. We're also liaisoning, as I mentioned, with the International Standards Organization. If you're familiar with ISO, it's Technical Committee 171, Subcommittee 2. Subcommittee 2 is the Authenticity of Information Subcommittee as Working Group 14. And that's because there are a lot of laws which are being proposed to deal with disinformation online. You may be familiar, for instance, within Europe, the European Union recently passed a number of laws about where AI could and could not be used and restrictions around it. Even in California, there's currently a bill that's being proposed around provenance, authenticity, and watermarking standards. And in order for bills to be able to reference this technology, it needs to be part of an international standard. They can't reference random projects. So what is Content Credentials trying to achieve? Basically, it's trying to tell you what were the tools and techniques used in the creation of the content. Did this originate from Adobe Firefly or DALL-E or some sort of generative AI tool? Did it come from a camera? What was the authenticity about this? Where was the source of this start? And then also it's working on provenance. So provenance is basically the history of change within these files over time. So you're probably all familiar within the media. A photographer will be out in the field, they'll take a shot with a camera. But between when they take that shot and when it actually ends up on a news article that you're reading, editing will happen. It'll get cropped, someone will add a lower third to it, et cetera. And by having this provenance chain, you actually get to have insights in terms of how that image changed from the time it was captured. So you can make judgments to say, was this cropped in a way that was misleading? Was this cropped in a way to intentionally mislead me? In addition to that, we are also working on outreach as part of our goals. So we're not just technology. So we recently received a $500,000 grant from the Societal Resilience Fund to launch an education campaign around deepfakes and get information out there. And basically, this is all to try to give you indicators so that you can make a decision about trust. Because when you think of trust, trust isn't a binary thing, right? You take a look at a whole bunch of different factors when you're trying to figure out whether or not to trust someone or to trust something. So for instance, I started this talk off by saying that I'm a member of the C2PA. So I maybe earned a point of trust in regards to being a subject matter expert on this because I'm actually a part of the committee. But I may have lost a point of trust because I would have a bias because I'm a part of the committee, right? And so as you're listening to me talk, you're sitting there and you're looking at the information I'm putting up. You're looking at the references I'm dropping. And you're putting all this together to try to figure out whether or not you're going to trust the presentation that I'm giving. It's not just one thing. And it's the same thing with images and videos, right? You look at what news organization did it come from, what reporter within the news organization, what was the topic that they were talking about, right? Like if I'm watching a sports commentator, I'm more likely to believe them if they're talking about sports, than I'm more likely to ignore them if they're talking about politics, right? Even if it's from the same company. So you assemble all of these things to come up with a decision of trust. But we're not trying to tell you whether or not to trust the content. That's a decision that you're going to continue to make on your own. Whether you trust a particular news organization or don't trust a particular news organization, that's going to be based on their history of putting out content, and how you've evaluated them over time. But what we're trying to do is add more transparency to it and try to make it so that if you see something online, and let's say it's from the BBC, and it upsets you, you can at least verify that it actually came from the BBC before you go start writing a rant about it or getting too worked up about it. You'll be able to confirm at least this came from the source that that says it came from. And was it altered from the time the BBC published it? Because sometimes people will take a photo from a trusted news organization and then they start altering it. So when you see this content online, you'll be able to determine, did it actually come from a place that you know and trust? We're adding timestamps to things. So one of the things you sometimes see is someone will take an image from a older conflict and then try to sell that to you as something that's going on in a current conflict. If the images are timestamped, then you'll at least have an idea that, OK, this photo was taken way before this conflict even started. Someone's trying to influence me. And we're not trying to solve deepfake detection. That's a whack-a-mole game. What we're trying to do is make it easier for you, for the consumer of content and the publisher of content to confirm that confirm that the information came from the source that they believed it came from. So how? I haven't gotten into any details yet. This is an engineering conference. So how are we doing this? So basically, what we're doing is we're putting manifests into images, audios, video, where you go and you create the asset. So you take a photo, for instance, or you go into Photoshop and you start drawing something, or you go into an AI tool. And then you make a series of assertions. So you can make an assertion that this photo was taken at these GPS coordinates, that this assertion was taken by this camera, that this assertion was taken by this person. And you put all those assertions together in an overall claim, and then you digitally sign that claim. Now, you'll notice that I'm saying phrases like assertion and claim. I'm not using words like truth or facts or guarantees, right? That's because the one thing that you're able to verify is who signed it. Everything else is a claim that's being made by the person or the tool that signed it. So, I could be lying to you, but then I have to actually sign my name to those lies, or my tool has to sign my name to those lies. And that allows you to track things over time to see who's been lying to you. And this implementation is based on existing standards. We're trying to not reinvent the wheel as much as we can. So we use standards like the concise binary object representation model, and jump format and COSI. These are all standards that have existed before us. We're just putting them together. We're using existing standards to make sure that if other people want to do implementations, they can easily find libraries to support it. And the digital signatures, of course, are all based on X509 certificate and signing. Since a lot of people here are cryptography based, and I just said the words X509, everybody says, well, how do you know which CA to trust, right? It's the first question that comes around. In order to make this happen, we're going to generate certificates with specific properties, which means that chances are only certain CAs will be supporting this. So this isn't going to be based on your browser or your OS trust list. This trust list also needs to be able to be portable between a camera and between mobile devices and IoT and stuff like that. So the formal trust list has not yet been published. Right now, we're still in our 1.0 deployment, so there's only a couple of people who are acting in that, and so we all know each other, and so we just verify it that way. But we will be publishing a trust list soon. It is based on OCSP and OCSP stapling in terms of revocation. Yes, I'm aware that Let's Encrypt recently decided to go back to CRLs. We're working on adopting that. But it does support revocation, and I'm actually in the process of writing revocation guidance. And there's some other crypto in there if you really want to dig into it, such as the use of both traditional hashing and perceptual hashes, so that you can kind of tell whether two images are similar. And since this is all about deepfakes, we are working to be able to support different things that are going on in the deepfake community. So technically, in terms of the assertions, you can identify, you can say what parts of the image were modified by it. You can include information about recipes. And one of the things that came out of the European Union standards was the idea of do not train, that you can mark your piece of content as not available for training in machine learning algorithms. There's different types of ways you can label things for do not train, but we support the European Union text and data mining standard in terms of being able to label your content as do not train. We also support other things, such as the IPTC's digital source type values that you can embed in these images. Unless you're a journalist, you probably have no idea who this group is, but this is important to journalists, because keep in mind, journalists get images sent to them all the time. They need a way of knowing where this image came from, because they just got it from a Gmail address from someone they've never met before, and they need ways of identifying this content. So let's look at actual images. These are 2 images I created with Adobe Firefly. Adobe Firefly is a text-to-image generative AI tool. And I said, give me some black hat hackers, so it gave me these 2. If I were to go into the image and actually look at it in a hex editor, you would see the manifest embedded in there. And it's going to include certain things. So it's going to say that this image was generated with an AI tool. This is part of the IPTC classification. It's going to tell you which AI tool generated it. So this was generated by Adobe Firefly. And the status of this manifest is that this is a creation manifest, which means this is the first generation of this image. So it came directly out of a generative AI tool. And then all these assertions are signed by Adobe. So Adobe is making the claim that it was Adobe's tool that created this image, and Adobe used generative AI to create this. So baked within the image, you can start to you have manifest data that you can go in and you can inspect and confirm that this was generated via AI. But let's say you edit an image. So the other image I generated, the person has this extra little tie for their hoodie because there's only one and they're not balanced and it just kind of looks weird. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove that from the image. When I did this in Photoshop, Photoshop supports content credentials, it added another manifest to the image. So the image still has its original manifest that says it came out of Adobe AI. And another manifest was added that said, Pellissiuli edited this photo. He edited this photo using Photoshop. The type of edit he did was drawing edits. And Adobe is putting its name behind all these assertions. Adobe is saying it was Adobe tools, and it was an Adobe account that's associated with it. So you can see I was the last one to touch it, and you can see what edits I made to it. And you still have the original image in there as part with a thumbnail, so you can compare and contrast the changes that were made between when it was originally generated and what it looks like now. Even as I was putting this together in my slide deck, Microsoft PowerPoint supports content credentials. And it was telling me as I was pasting these images into PowerPoint, the one that I had on the left was created with Adobe Firefly, and then the edited one was created with Adobe Photoshop. This is another place where you're starting to see content credential supports in there. But let's say I make edits to the image, and I don't record the changes I make. So this is another image created by Firefly. It has the manifest in there to say that it was generated by Adobe Firefly. And I'm going to go in there, I'm going to add an Adobe logo to her beanie to make her an Adobe hacker. If I just went in there and I edited it, I didn't add a manifest about the edits that I changed, you're able to go in there and see, well, OK, the original details of the image are still in there. The original manifest is still in there that was created with Adobe Firefly. But this latest version of it, there's no content credentials associated with it. So we can't tell you what was changed or who changed it, but someone changed it and they did not, they didn't sign their name to it, and it's different than the thing that originally came from. So you're able to see when people make changes. And in addition to that, other types of screwing around, like if I go and I try to mess with a digital signature or something like that, it can give you other types of error messages if someone tries to alter an image that is correctly signed. So what's the roadmap for this look like? This is a rapidly advancing standard. We are working quickly as far as standards organizations go. So the very first version came out in 2021. And then since then, we've been putting out 2 versions per year as we get feedback from the community. So we did 1.1 and 1.2 in 2022. In 2023, we did 1.3 and 1.4. At the beginning of this year, we released 2.0. And 2.1 is currently in draft status up on the c2pa.org website. So we are taking information and feedback that we are getting from the community, and we're putting that into the spec as fast as we can. And we're actually outpacing the implementations in terms of how fast we are working. And in addition to that, from the security side, I'm working on increasing the security considerations document. Right now it's on the 1.4 version. I'm going to be updating it to include more information about how revocation is going to work in the system. And I also created a C2PA attacks tool. Right? Typically what happens is someone goes out and builds a technology, and then you wait a while for somebody in the hacker community to go build the tool to go test it. This is open source, and we want to get this tested right away, so I just went ahead and wrote the tool. We wrote the SDK, and I also wrote the tool to do the testing. It still needs some features. It's in its 1.0 version, but it is open source, and people can contribute to it. I want to add things to it, such as fuzzing capabilities, and also add more support for 2.0 versions of the spec. So we are working on trying to get feedback from the community. And typically when I give this presentation, I come back with a couple of frequently asked questions. So the first thing that most people ask is, well, can you just strip all these bits out of the image? Sure, you can. And we're right back to where we've started. But the goal here is that if we reach critical mass and we're able to get companies signing this on a regular basis, then the absence of the digital signatures will start to seem suspicious, right? So if BBC signs everything that's going out the door, and you see something from that claims to be from the BBC but it's not signed by them, that will be suspicious. Other questions I get about this have to do with privacy and privacy. So is it our goal to make every image ever taken contain content credentials? No. That's not the goal of this. This is not the problem it's trying to solve. Obviously, there's all sorts of implications for minors and other contexts where you just don't want to sign it. The image is sensitive for some reason. You don't want it personally signed. That said, we are trying to support anonymity and anonymous journalism, right? So one of the long-term goals for this specification is to allow field reporters who are in conflict zones, whose lives may be at risk, to be able to do reporting and to be able to sign the images that they've created and get those back to their home journalist organization where they can confirm this actually came from that journalist while still being able to maintain anonymity around their identity. So we are trying to work towards that goal. If you're a journalist in the field right now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it at this stage of the spec. I think it needs more testing before we start using it for that. But that is one of the goals that we are working towards. When will we achieve this glorious state of widespread deployment? We're working on it. As the Content Authenticity Initiative currently has around 3,000 members. The C2PA currently has around 100 members. We have a lot of organizations who are getting on board and helping push this through. And we're building liaisons with other standards organizations, JPEG, ISO, et cetera. So we're achieving critical mass, but we're not quite at the level where we need to be to make this part of everyday use. But we're getting there. Some people ask whether this is a watermark or a fingerprint, and it's not. We are supportive of watermarks and fingerprints. You can add a watermark to the image. Content Credentials isn't going to care. We work with watermark groups to make sure that we don't step on each other's toes, but it's not meant to support that. It's also not meant to support copyright. Copyright's a legal concept. It is not a digital concept. You can put an assertion in there saying that you own the copyright to it, But you can do that today with XMP metadata, and it has the same impact. It's not just here to solve copyright. Have we found bugs? Yes, that's part of the reason why there's multiple versions of the spec. We've had people out there testing it and finding issues with it, and we've been updating the spec accordingly. So the 2.1 version of the spec actually includes some bug fixes from the original documentation. We're cleaning up things like validation, et cetera. And is there a bug bounty? Yes, there is a bug bounty. So Adobe is even doing a promotion around the bug bounty where if you add that promo code and you find a bug, you'll get a 35% bonus on top of whatever the bug would normally be rated as. So we are actively asking the security community, and part of the reason why I'm doing this presentation is I'm trying to get the security community to assist in finding bugs, helping us test this out, trying to get feedback into the system so that we can find and flesh out these bugs as quickly as possible. And then, of course, the number one FAQ I'm going to get is, will this all this work, right? Is this just bloatware for images, or will this actually help in the fight against disinformation? We currently think it will. So for instance, the model that you guys are currently familiar with is downloading digital binaries, right? When you go and you download Chrome, it's digitally signed by Google. And you trust that it came from Google because it's digitally signed by Google. And Google has a reputation for signing all of their binaries, as does Microsoft, as does Adobe. And so if you come across a binary that's not signed by Google, you immediately become suspicious, right? Once it gets into a repetitive cycle, the lack of this will actually start to raise suspicion. And because we have the manifest in there, you can look at the history of things. You're able to know how it came into existence, how it changed over time, and who was the last person to make a change to it. It's not going to stop criminals from doing crime. That again, is a whack-a-mole game. People will continue to try to create disinformation campaigns, try to spread disinformation. They're still going to try to create bot accounts on social media, all of those sort of things. But what we're trying to do is at least trying to make it easier for people to be able to confirm when the disinformation gets sent to them, that they have some sort of tool to be able to confirm whether or not it came from the source that the person claimed it came from. And hopefully, that not only helps consumers, it also helps journalists, because journalists are getting images from all over the place. They want to make sure that what they put online actually came from a reliable source. It's going to help technology companies like Google and Meta when they're trying to filter images to figure out whether they came from, whether they're potentially generative AI or came from a deepfake. So right now we have 0 tools, and this is going to be at least one tool in the tool belt to help combat that. And that's the goal that we're going for. I have some additional resources for you guys. If you want to contribute, this is an open standard. This is a published standard. We are working in GitHub. Our tools are out there. We have bug bounties on this stuff. So if you want to be able to contribute, like I said, there's 3,000 companies, give or take, in Content Authenticity Initiative. There's a chance that your company is already contributing. So you can go find who you work for there and try to find a way in there. We also take feedback from the community. So Adam Shostak, who is on the review board for Black Hat, and a subject matter expert in threat models, gave me feedback on the security considerations document, and I incorporated his feedback. So we do take feedback, and that makes it into the system. Here are some links for you if you guys are taking screenshots. The slides will also be available afterwards, so if you're not able to get a photo or if it's blurry, the slide decks will be available. And then you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me personally. We also have a Discord channel where people can join in to the conversation and ask questions and give us feedback. And I don't know, if you want to test yourself to see how good you are with deepfakes, Adobe has like a Faker Photoshop link where you can go and play and see how many photos you can recognize as being real. That said, I'm at time, so I'm going to be available in the wrap room if anybody has any questions. Thank you.